biggest critiques of Eli of not getting into the Hall of Fame because I think you let Eli in. So many people who are like borderline should get in as well. And my only reason why I push back towards Eli, I give him all of the credit for 2011. I've said this time and time again. 2011, that was his masterclass. Sure. He absolutely dogged, and nobody threw for more yards in a playoff run than him in history. I think he threw 9 touchdowns, no interceptions. No. He was on fire. He carved up the damn Patriots. 2007, he did all right in the playoffs. He was all right, but then the defense, I'll give them that. Outside of those 2 seasons, because the tail end of 2007, that December on, he played enough to go and win the game. Yeah. For all intents and purposes, I say he was managing. 2011, he took over. That was his. 2008, he was on fire. Had Plaxico not shot himself, you guys might have went 15-1. You might have went 15-1 and possibly made a push towards the Super Bowl. But outside of those seasons, there's maybe one other one. And then Eli, for all intents and purposes, got 4 good seasons. In the midst of those 4, you got 1 great one. Everything else is relatively average to his, contemporaries. You had a season in 11 where you can argue were a top 5 quarterback. And even still, that's somewhat borderline depending on where you would rank, because that season, people were going crazy. You had Rodgers had the greatest quarterback season of all time. You had Brady coming off of the MVP season. Manning was obviously out. Drew Brees had thrown for God knows how many yards that year. Right. I think that might have been the year that Stafford had thrown for 49 as well, whatever the case may be. Matt Ryan was doing his thing. Everybody was slinging. Yeah, everybody was slinging it that year. But my case against Manning is whenever they talk about Eli, they have to talk about Brady first. So it's like your case that you make for him, it's about somebody else.
True, absolutely. But here's the big argument you could poke into that. Do you know who else is in the Hall of Fame, quarterback-wise?
Joe Namath.
Yeah,
but the thing it was that they played in different eras, right? Because the problem is, if you look at guys who played in like Crazy Legs Hirsch, you pull up these guys who played back in the day, compared to who they played against during that time, the game, I don't want to say it wasn't developed to a T or whatever the case may be, but the vast majority of them, if we were to compare them to now, you damn near got to start pulling people out the Hall of Fame.
I mean, well, that's kind of the point, too. Because think about it. Like, I'm pretty sure, and y'all can fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure he's got a losing record.
Yep.
And he's also got more interceptions than touchdowns.
He does.
And he's in the Hall of Fame with 1 ring. Eli Manning, up until maybe, I think it was just this year he got lapped, was top 10 in passing yards all time, top 10 in passing touchdowns all time. Might be off on that. He might be like 12, 13, something like that. Okay? And then he's got 2 Super Bowl runs, 2 Super Bowl MVPs. And then, of course, the caveat, like you're talking about at the end, the asterisk, it's against the GOAT.
Right.
And, like, that is, like, I don't know, because the 2 people that actually beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl are who? Eli and Nick Foles. Right. And, like, you're not going to throw Nick Foles in the Hall of Fame because of the fact that he beat Tom Brady one time. Because, again, the majority of his career does not back up, like, even making that argument. But then if you look at Eli, aside from all other stats and everything else that's around him, you have beating the GOAT, and then you have the last name.
Right.
And, like, just that alone, like, the politics of the situation, he's going in.
Right.
And, like, I almost get the argument of, like, well, yeah, he should go in, but it shouldn't be first ballot. It shouldn't be first ballot. But it's like, okay, argument made, but what's the difference between him just going in on the first time he's looked at versus the next? He's still going in.
Yeah, because the thing with the first ballot, and I 110% support when Deion Sanders, and believe it or not, Skip Bayless had talked about there's like Hall of Famers and then there's Hall of Famers. There should be an upper room up in there, right? Because it'll never sit right with my spirit that Terrell Owens wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Oh, of course.
And now thinking about like with the Hall of Fame, and I truly do believe there should be an upper room that's in there, because you could look at some guys like a Deion, like a Montana, a Peyton Manning, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, Ronnie Lott, Reggie White. These guys should be in their own wing, because when you really talk about the story of football, these are the real staples that are there. And then you have other guys who had gotten in who, for all intents and purposes, you may have put up great numbers, but were you ever really like the best? Like, for example, another guy who's probably going to go in, who I think his career is very comparable to a number of different guys who are borderline, is like somebody like Frank Gore. You ran for 16,000 yards, but never in your career were you the best running back in the league, nor top 3. You could argue top 5. He probably had a couple of seasons because he was incredibly consistent, but there was always a different guy who was in front of you. When he came into the league, LT, Sean Alexander, those guys were running the show. Then by the time he started to really catch his stride, that's when Adrian Peterson and Chris Johnson came in.
Lapped him.
Marshawn Lynch towards the early 2010s when he started getting going. Because Frank Gore, I think he really, when early 2010s when Harbaugh showed up, that was his time to shine. But you still had Adrian Peterson going for 2,000. Marshawn Lynch winning Super Bowls and running people over, everything of that nature. And there was always somebody who was in front, but you were incredibly consistent. I would look at him, Frank Gore, almost the same situation with Mike Evans. But with Mike Evans, it's a little bit different because you can make the argument, hey, he's still top 5 because he's missed a 1,000.
Yeah, that's going to be the thing. Like, he has the asterisk to go next to him where it's like, hey, look, he's never had less than 1,000 yards.
Right.
No
and
matter,
AJ Green was off to the same start and it still happened. Right. And it's one of those situations where when I look at the Hall of Fame, I'm like, man, there's so many guys who I think should be in that aren't yet. Like Sterling Sharp should be in the Hall.
100%.
The fact that once they let Terrell Davis in and Kenny Easley in, I said, oh, they got to open up the door for Sterling. Because you played 7 years. The only other receiver who had put up better numbers than you was Jerry Rice. And your last season that you played, you led the league in touchdowns, everything of that nature. You got to be able to get in based off of the numbers. They have other guys where Kurt Warner, 2-time MVP, champion, everything. And I loved Kurt Warner. But really, that gap between Arizona and St. Louis, where he was just like, all right, I'm just chilling. We ain't really doing nothing. And then out of nowhere, my beard's a little gray. Let me give my wife something to talk about. I'm going to throw a bunch of touchdowns out here to Larry Fitzgerald and Steve Breston and Anquan Bolden. In the receiver realm, you have Anquan Bolden who's got numbers. I don't think he's going to mess around and get in. Brandon Marshall's got great numbers. He's probably not going to get in. Chad Johnson, had he not headbutted his wife at the time, he would have probably got in. But Chad Johnson, you look at his numbers, it's neck and neck with Michael Irvin. But Irvin won those 3 Super Bowls and was.
And that's the thing. It's like the committee is always going to value those team accomplishments towards the player,
right?
And especially when it comes to like a quarterback, and that's where, like, unfortunately, for the Eli haters in the section, it's like you can't argue it because, like, if you want to argue the fact that, like, okay, like Tom Brady is as good as he is because of 7 Super Bowl rings, then you start dissecting. All right, let's talk about those 7 rings.
Right.
First 3 were the defense. Can't argue with me otherwise.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, defense and a kicker.
Yeah, defense and the kicker. He had his moments, though. I mean, against Carolina, the second half, I'll give him all of the credit for that there. But then it's not just a Herculean effort from one guy. Because, and even with Eli, a lot of people have been like, well, what about those somebody else who has 2 championships that they didn't win? Well, I mean, Phil Simms, I think he got the 2, but Hostetler started in the second one. But Simms, and he played magnificent in the first Super Bowl, but if I look at Simms, he's not a Hall of Famer, right? And then even Plunkett got 2 with the Raiders, but Plunkett's not no damn Hall of Famer. Heisman winner, but he ain't no damn Hall of Famer.
Damn.
So, because for me, I just look at it like, man, I think ultimately he will get in. My argument is just primarily against like the first ballot, because the moment that but then it almost doesn't even matter with like the first ballot no more, because once you're in, you're in.
Yeah, I think like the people who argue the first ballot thing, you forget that like there's people like Namath that exist that kind of already diluted the idea of like first ballot being this some super prestigious thing. And like I'm for the idea of trying to make it come back that way. But like I don't know, like what are you gonna do? Erase half the answers on the test already that are already filled in on the Scantron? It's tough to go back and do. You can't like retroactive it. So that's why I say like, look, you know what? Like with the people that are already in there, you really can't make the argument.
Yeah, and that's where it's very difficult. because with Namath, there's some technicalities for him in a sense because there was a lot of gunslinger era. Like with Favre was the kind of guy where I could throw 5 interceptions, but although I threw all those picks, it really don't mean nothing because by the end of the game, we're either going to win or if the pick doesn't lead to a touchdown or a field goal on the other, it's a wash. You could consider it a punt.
Bro didn't even know what a nickel defense
right,
was.
He didn't. It was what was that over there? I think he was so far along in his career to where this was like right before he went to the Jets, and then somebody had to introduce. Like, oh wait, okay. I thought it was something like I'll take from Mississippi. I thought that's what it was. But with him, he was somebody who's just throwing the ball, launching it, all this other stuff. Namath, somewhat of the same, but to a different degree, and he was playing with no knees. But that's not supposed to, defend his argument because how many people have played with injuries like that?
All of them.
So when he was one of those guys where it's like, all right, I'll throw 4 interceptions here, but the Jets defense is going to keep it close, and then I'll have a game-winning drive or something like that. But I could look at Terry Bradshaw. He only has, I think, 2 more touchdowns than he has interceptions.
Yep.
But you have those 4 Super Bowl victories, and the back end of his career is when he really, in my opinion, became a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Because I started, thank God for the NFL Network. When I first got cable in 2008 when I was 14, all I did was watch like the classic games versus just because if you just watch highlights, you'll never really get a full concept of like the player and what they did. That's how I looked at like Kenny Stabler. I said, oh man, he's great and everything. That's what Dan Fouts. I'm like, you know what? If Dan Fouts had won a championship, him and Marino was almost like the same kind of where, although Marino was a better quarterback, but put up yards, put up touchdowns, but you're just gonna get over the hump.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of players like that who most should be should or already in the Hall of Fame, and then other guys who just haven't gotten the call, and truly I don't know if they ever will. And there's some people who are just terrible human beings who, if you're already in the hall, they can't take you out. Like somebody like OJ, hey, you can't take him out. But then if you're
man, the glove didn't fit. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. It's all alleged. I think he was probably covering for his son. I don't know because now they said they may have found evidence that he confessed to it. I just think his son probably did it, and then he just said, hey, I'll take the bullet for my child because I'm a good dad. And then, but hey. I don't know, but. Somebody comparable to him would be Darren Sharper.
Yes, that's another problem. Honestly, I think that was a little worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't condone any of the things.
Right.
But like
right.
That was.
It was crazy, crazy. And what's wild was the first thing my mind thought when I saw it. I'm like, why would you do this when they already know who you are? You don't even need to do this. Yep. And then you were 3 years away from finally, being a first ballot Hall of Famer. You just ruined your entire, like why? This was not necessary whatsoever. But then if you talk about the greatest safeties of all time, I mean, he may be a terrible human being. You don't want to bring a woman around him, but my God, could he, pick off a football?